Tape 3. Side A. Scream, fuck, and die.
I couldn't believe I'd forgotten to carry extra tapes. As a matter of integrity, part-time detectives are forbidden from backing away from an interview. Think of it like an interrogative duel.
According to the Code Duolo, the internationally used reference drafted by the Irish in 1777, even certain duels could be called off with an appropriate apology.
Ask any part-time detective worth their trench coat. You don't back down from the pursuit of justice.
I still think you might be in a detective cult.
Anyway, recording my conversations was my only opportunity to use them as evidence. Plus, with my strange symptoms affecting my memory, I couldn't risk forgetting a clue. Fortunately, the NOLA pharmacist still hadn't answered the phone. I ran from the pharmacy to find a woman busking on the sidewalk. She was selling mixtapes, the old-school analog kind, which normally I'd feel bad about recording over, but her song seemed to be about her lifelong ambition to reach superhost status on Airbnb. Listen, we all have a dream, but maybe some shouldn't be set to music. Anyway, as I reached into my trench coat pocket, I remembered that Dorito had stolen my wallet after our instantly regrettable kiss. The busker was cash only and wouldn't take an IOU, so I reverted to my chosen currency. I asked if she had any mysteries I could solve. Just one, she said. She'd always wondered what happened to her college boyfriend, a lisping drifter who'd made the wrong friends and then moved to Chihuahua to help build a windowless compound out of fulvous whistling duck tongue. Think Jonestown, but with less juice and more joints. A missing person's not a 10-second case. But then, a man drifted by with a buzz cut, black eye, and a Waterfowl Forever t-shirt that had definitely seen its share of guano.
Que tengas un bonito dia, sir.
Is it that guy? It was! She punched him! He liked it, and they resumed a relationship that would likely ensure their mutual destruction.
Gracias, dude.
De nada. I raced back into the pharmacy, frantically jamming the cassette tape into my recorder, just in time to hear...
Hello, I'm Owen Ever.
Part-time detective case note number 25. I'm speaking to a social historian, medical clown, and radio maker who enjoys pharmaceutical cosplay. Could you please introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Owen Ever. I am the co-host of A Field Guide to Gay Animals from Canada Land and a social historian and curator at the New Orleans Pharmacy Museum.
I'd wanted to talk to a pharmacist to discuss my symptoms, but Owen's introduction had piqued my curiosity. I allowed myself to pivot. So are you at the pharmacy right now?
I am at the pharmacy right now. This beautiful building is the site of America's first licensed medical practice.
So there were, I guess, rogue pharmacies before. Why is that licensing so important?
Well, it marks a turning point in the question of proven adequacy. So this is early 19th century. The pharmacist in residence here, Dr. Dufio, he was the first person to take an examination to prove adequacy in 1816. Did that stop people from practicing? No, it did not. Anyone could continue to practice. There was hardly any enforcement. And this is a time pre-germ theory. So you see the incorporation of many different cultural traditions, superstitions, belief systems, cosmologies are all contributing to the idea of science, to the idea of health, to the idea of survival.
Right. So sort of early medical science, there's a very watery line between sort of superstitions and the supernatural. I thought of Aurora in the case of the phantom phone call.
Yes.
And of course, something that New Orleans is so well known for is the myth and the lore, sort of all the cultures from all over the world that found themselves in New Orleans. So could you speak to that relationship?
Yeah, I am glad that you mentioned superstition because what is superstition if not making meaning out of the observable realities around you? And in a time in which science is offering very little in terms of actionable knowledge, superstition becomes what people are relying on to take care of themselves and each other. So for example, in a time in which tuberculosis, which was known as consumption in the 19th century, is the most common face of death, people don't understand pulmonary illness. That has not been interpreted. Tuberculosis has not been identified until the 20th century. Ideas of transmission are vague and mostly linked to the bad air, the miasma, the moral constitution of the population. So if you see blood coming out of someone's mouth, where does that blood come from? You're not thinking lungs, you're thinking stomach. You're thinking like this is a consumption disease. Something is consuming you. You are consuming something. That blood is because you have blood in your stomach. How did blood get into your stomach? You must be eating blood? Are you consuming blood? What does that mean?
Note to self, depending on how you're dressed and who you're with, a mouthful of blood might mean you're at church.
And then we end up with vampirism being a one-to-one diagnosis, what we now know as tuberculosis, and just this like strange communicable disease that everyone was confronted with and terrified of. And the idea of vampirism, we call that a superstition, but that was essentially an actionable worldview. You knew what to do. There, you could rely on centuries of tradition. Your neighbors knew. You could consult the texts. There weren't medical texts that were readily accessible to people telling you about the transmissible diseases and how to, ward them off. So people were getting, using garlic, isolating the body, getting rid of the body, burying the body, which was relatively rare.
Right. There's so much to unpack there.
Mm.
These were for the deceased, but would people, for example, go into a pharmacy and say, I think there's a vampire in my neighborhood? What kind of vampirism concerns would they take to a pharmacist?
Yeah, well, one of the primary treatments that the sort of Western allopathic pharmacist in these nascent inchoate days of Western medicine was at the pharmacy was bloodletting. The doctor at this point was licensed or unlicensed, was in charge of the balancing of your humors, your blood, the various liquids inside your body. So if you think someone has vampiric blood, the one thing that a pharmacist or a barber surgeon could provide is leeches, is fleams, is scarifiers, ways to purge the body.
Right.
This heroic medicine, it was known as heroic medicine because it was all about like extreme forms of purging, of bloodletting. So the doctor could give you things that would help to rid the body of that vampiric influence.
Right.
And bloodletting was one of the primary ones that a doctor could give you. Now you could go down the street to a priestess, like a voodoo mambo, and get a different kind of potion, protective potion. This pharmacy here, this French pharmacy, also sold voodoo potions under the table to Catholics.
Oh, wow. Just sort of hedge your bets.
Yes.
Because who's to say?
Yeah, you needed to really like circle it. And because this city, I mean, it was known as the necropolis of the South. It was the wet grave. There was so much death. Death was abundant, and equally abundant was the permissive lifestyles, was the sex economy, was the lascivious nature of just being here. I mean, France wasn't importing its like most like morally superior individuals. It was all like convicts, quote unquote.
That's right. New Orleans and Australia. That's where they sent all
yeah.
the misfits. Kerching! Now I knew why Ruby had found me a NOLA pharmacist. They'd obviously been listening to my case notes.
They were all coming here and people were trying to survive, and it was really tough. This was like a rough place to be.
Mhm.
And so having an orientation towards joy makes sense. And then all of a sudden you're like, there's so much homosexuality here. There's so much queer possibility here. Everyone's getting tempted outside of, like the heteronormative, monogamous, constraints of the Victorian era, and wanting to scapegoat that. Wanting to be like, oh, I was seduced by something. I'm still going to church. This is a Catholic city.
One sec, Owen. Ruby, what's the nun story this is reminding me of?
Sister Act?
No.
Sister Act 2, back in the habit?
Well, no.
Just kidding. You're likely thinking of Sister Bartolomea, the 17th century Italian nun who held red-hot sapphic congress with her abbess Sister Benedetta when they were caught. Bartolomea blamed the seduction on Vendetta's possession by a male demon named Splenditello.
Almost like the elite only believe in God so they can blame their sins on the devil. Thanks, Ruby. Sorry, you were talking about scapegoats?
The vampire becomes both the scapegoat for disease and also for any sort of permissive experience or like liberated sexual experience that you've had.
I see.
And so then disease, queerness, vampirism become this like holy trifecta of this city where they all sort of inform each other.
So I'm really interested in this idea of moralizing health. On the one hand, it could be used to sort of punish people or penalize people to say you're sick because of something you've done. But on the other hand, moralizing a condition is kind of an excuse in the way where you say it's someone else's sin that infected me. Wow. So do you think, was vampirism or an accusation of vampirism always sexually related?
I don't know if it was always sexually related, but from the earliest instances of vampire lore, there has always been sexual innuendo. Because when we're talking about communicable diseases, we're talking about bodies in contact with each other, and there's something illicit and promiscuous about that in a time in which we don't understand other forms of vectors. So there is something seductive about the vampire because the vampire is the stand-in for transmission.
Right. Okay.
And some of that is moral. It is about like the ungodliness, the unholy, the other. There's also a lot of xenophobia that gets rolled into this, the outsider.
Mm.
And of course, you know, if we're looking at the 19th century, homophobia and anti-Semitism and anti-immigrant policies and sentiments are sort of all developing in parallel. And the vampire also becomes a pinnacle identity for all three of those, you know, it's like this creature of the night who's out cruising. And then, you know, moving forward into New Orleans later on in like the late 70s, we have a lot of queer liberation happening here in New Orleans and a lot of public gay sex happening in the French Quarter. And then we have Anne Rice observing all of this and writing her queer vampire lore.
Note to self, which Alex, the upside-down Menton screenwriter, had drooled over at the bus stop.
Just this idea of permissive sexual in the alleyways cruising going on.
Right.
Like, what is this other world, this sort of underbelly that feels both equally terrifying and seductive? And that's like the realm of the vampire.
Right. So she kind of reifies that idea with a positive intention, but then of course what came later in the 80s and early 90s then sort of reifies the idea of moralizing all that behavior too.
Yes, yes. It becomes remoralized as queerness then becomes once again like deeply connected to a diagnostic and pathological identity and specifically to a bloodborne illness.
Right.
It's all tied together and it's like as humans, like we're meaning makers. We're trying to understand this reality. And church as a primary location of knowledge and meaning making is failing us. And then medicine, Western science is failing us. We're going to carve our own space. And that is often deemed as the space of superstition. But it's really just the space of like collective shared knowledge.
Right.
And our own sort of storytelling tradition.
Right. And born out of a lack of any other where to turn, really.
Mm-hmm.
To go back to what you said before, could I walk into a pharmacy in 1890 in New Orleans and buy leeches?
And buy leeches? Yes, of course you could. This pharmacy here was in operation until 1871. And there were advertisements as to where the leeches were being imported from.
Wow.
So he would run advertisements of like fresh batch of French leeches from Marseille, leeches from Vienna, which because this was a city of many different cultural enclaves, people wanted things that felt familiar. They wanted doctors that spoke their language. They wanted belief systems that they recognized. And the idea of getting a leech that was from France, where they were from, that would suck their French blood, like that was really desirous. Like who was taking your blood made all the difference in the world.
Of course, that makes so much sense from all sides of the equation. There's so much comfort in being seduced by a story, even in medicine.
Yes, yes. And the pharmacist here knew that. They knew they also had to provide a bit of magic and a bit of seductive appeal. These days, when you walk into Walgreens, we're accustomed to seeing the pharmacist in the back and not quite sure why. But in the 19th century, that was done to increase the amount of magical appeal that the pharmacist was working with. That was one of their key ingredients, was that they would remove themselves. They would go hide behind a beautiful piece of furniture. You could hear the clanging of the mortar and pestle, the glass, all the different sounds. Maybe he's flipping through his materia medica dramatically.
The materia medica is basically a big book of medical plans and the medicines that they can be used to produce.
Thanks.
And you're left to wonder what is happening. And then he comes back out with a little pill that he's concocted for you. This was done because they knew that the story that went into it, the story that happened in your mind as you waited for that medicine to get made, was going to have perhaps a far greater effect on the efficacy of that pill than what was actually in the pill.
Right, right.
You needed to believe more than that pill needed to do something, you know? Because they didn't know what they were giving you.
Yes, of course.
It was probably just mercury and it was just gonna, make you vomit.
Yeah, lead and cocaine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the placebo performance as placebo, which I find so fascinating. And it sounds like, as you're describing it, the pharmacist was really sort of like one half carnival barker, one half Wizard of Oz.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is the time of patent medicines, of the medicine salesman. And so you had to have a performative element to your practice if you are going to have a patient base, if you're going to have a client base.
Yeah.
Especially when like what people are looking to overcome are not like very cut and dry diagnostic realities like we're used to today. Like, what is the symptom pool? It's XYZ. Now we know what to give you. They're like, I've been cursed.
Right.
There's a vampire. Like, there's a lot, like my husband was out late at the brothel, brought home miasma. And like, so we're praying, is there anything else you can do in sequence with that?
Right, of course.
So the performative element was essential.
Of course. To go back to something you said before, you mentioned a profession called a barber surgeon, I believe. What is that?
So prior to surgery becoming its own specific area of expertise and study, the barber was a primary individual who would like attend to your surgical needs. The barber had the blades. Thinking about early Victorian era, you're not exposing yourself to many people. Perhaps if your doctor is doing a home visit, they will be able to have intimate glimpses of your wounds. But if you're going to a barber, they're looking at your hair, they're close to your neck, they're like in all of these vulnerable, intimate positions. And so they're also going to be the ones that you will show your syphilitic chancres to, your gangrenous like limbs to. And so they'll be performing your primary minor surgeries.
Wow.
And much of the bloodletting as well. The red and white striped pole that we're familiar with comes from the barber surgeons hanging their bloody rags outside the shop in order to indicate that they are available, they're open for business to be doing bloodletting and minor surgeries, which if you have shops on your street corners with buckets of blood and bloody rags, like obviously that's also going to increase this idea of vampires because blood is just so prevalent and present.
It's everywhere.
And, doctors, pharmacists, surgeons, barbers, they're all just collecting your blood. Everyone's just like giving their blood. Where's that blood going?
Right.
What's happening to this blood? Blood's in the street. Who's, taking advantage of this blood? There must be someone who's consuming it. Is it all going to the vampire? Is it feeding the vampire, the great mysterious beast of the city?
That's right. And so I'm curious too, with all that blood, was there a secondary market? Would they just dump it in a river?
I mean, that is the question. What is that secondary market? I don't know.
I got the sense that Owen wasn't giving me the whole story. Denial isn't just a river in Egypt, if you catch my exodus.
I mean, the records say that it was just being dumped into the street or tossed into the privy. But perhaps I think that is where a lot of this like legend and lore of vampires going to these places where you have access to, that day's freshest blood supply.
It sounds like truly above everything else, a mecca for mosquitoes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, did we even mention that New Orleans is a swamp? I think like our bodies recognize that something is happening, that our blood is being sucked, that there is some sort of like transmission occurring that is blood related, but like our brains haven't figured out sensation. And so we're using the lore, the collective lore of vampires to explain it. In fact, it's actually mosquitoes.
Right.
Mosquitoes, which are basically the state bird of Louisiana.
Ruby, I know he's joking, but what is the state bird of Louisiana?
You're not going to believe this, but the eastern brown pelican.
Pelican? You've got to be kidding me.
They're just everywhere, and they're the ones who are coming and sucking our blood and transmitting the disease.
All the blood talk was getting to me, so I switched gears before I lost my lunch. Do mosquitoes ever get up to any queer stuff?
I don't know about mosquitoes. Good question. But there's definitely a lot of gay bugs. Some of the first depiction of non-human gay sex were beetles.
I thought of Lauren's Christmas beetle scalp tattoo in the shadow of the Dunkaroos factory.
In Germany, from 1830 to 1860, there's a bunch of entomologists who are obsessed with the cockchafer beetle, also known as the doodlebug, who are incredibly gay. They love anal penetration. They actually have a preference for anal penetration. But because they weren't mammals, it was okay for these scientists to observe and discuss it. Getting into, larger, more charismatic creatures, and suddenly there was a question of personal perversion. You get into a nebulous moral territory if you're talking about homosexuality among any larger creature. But if you're talking about bugs, then it's okay. It's just bugs. There's no possible way that you're going to be bitten by the gay bug. But buggery, you think that term, where does that term come from? I need to figure out where that term comes from.
Hey, Ruby, where does that term come from?
Buggery comes from the Anglo-Norman bugger, derived from the Latin bulgarus, a reference to Bulgaria, home of a heretical sect called the Bugimils.
What, you getting paid by the bee?
You don't pay me.
Okay, more clue, please.
The term was used to pejoratively associate the Bugimils with sodomy and other allegedly abominable practices.
Despite never winning Eurovision, Bulgaria's always seemed queer. Wait, isn't its capital
Sofia,
the apex predator of the Golden Girls?
Coincidentally, Bulgaria's patron saint is John of Rila, who legend suggests was so adored by animals that birds would land in his bare hands. Basically the Saint Francis of Assisi of the Balkans.
Aurora Celestial second baseman. That's no coincidence. Thanks, Ruby.
I mean, I think bugs will inherit the earth. They're so wise, they are so abundant. But it's true, we have created this hierarchical biopolitic that puts us at the top and bugs at the bottom. And so it's a lot easier for us in our moral, high chair to look down at bugs and be like, okay, so bugs are doing gay stuff. But as we move up the ladder in the Victorian era, it starts to become way more problematic to start to associate that aberrant, perverse behavior with larger mammals and then with humans.
Right.
That has to become illegal among humans. We have to guard against that. But it's a lot easier to look at bugs. In the 80s, though, there was a lepidopterist. He studied butterflies who published...
Thank you for the definition.
Yes. A paper called The Apparent Lowering of Moral Standards Among Lepidoptera. And he was witnessing all of these newly emerged from chrysalis butterflies having gay sex. And he was like, what is happening? Are humans in some way influencing butterflies? Which it's they literally just popped out of a goo. They're not popping out of goo and then watching gay porn and getting ideas.
How on earth, in what scenario could a butterfly alight on my shoulder and overhear some sort of social conditioning from me or see something? It is so, but it goes back to what you said, this idea that we really do love to fill in the cracks in our human limitations with lore and these fantastic stories, which we then easily blend into fact.
Yes. The space between one experience and another experience, we navigate that by developing story.
That's right.
The space between an experience and a belief, we navigate that by developing lore.
Yeah.
That is how we thread the needle between my reality and your reality by developing lore. That's how we meet each other.
It sounds like part of the human condition is really just the desire to connect the dots.
Yes, absolutely.
So as a final question, what about cicadas? There's been so much talk this year about superbroods. Do you know anything about cicadas specifically as far as bugs and gay sex go? Have you heard anything about this?
Yes, a bunch of bugs come from the underground to scream and die. Sign me up. Are we not just reinventing a vampiric mythology right there? A gay vampire mythology. That feels so exciting. The cicadas emerging, we know so little about it. We're going to see the emergence of all kinds of questionable stories that we're going to tell each other about it. That feels so true and so anchored in our historic approach to anything that is happening that is sensational. I know very little about these gay zombie cicadas aside from I'm go for it. That's great.
Owen, thank you so much. This has been incredibly informative. I've learned a lot and I'll never look at a barber pole the same way again.
My pleasure.
I'd completely forgotten to ask Owen about my symptoms, but they seem to have disappeared. Maybe the stress of the case had been getting to me. Maybe my illness had been buried by the adrenaline that comes with a new set of clues. Or maybe I just needed to talk to a human being. Someone who wasn't a royalty-free AI-powered text-to-speech robot. Although, there was something about Ruby that calmed me too. And surprised me, which was odd given that they weren't capable of generating their own thoughts. But they could almost instantaneously remix the full scope of Earth's recorded knowledge and, in doing so, potentially sequence it in a way it had never been sequenced before. Maybe that's not much, but wasn't that exactly what human beings did too? Combine the things they've seen, heard, felt, and dreamt into a sequence that feels like them? I couldn't figure out if this made me less of a human or Ruby less of a machine. In any case, I was intrigued. I left the pharmacy just in time to catch the next bus.
Hey, your color came back. They got you on the good medicine?
French leeches.
Why do I talk to passengers? It never makes my day better. No one is normal.
I normally stand on public transit in case I needed to chase a clue in a hurry, but I was still a little shaky on my feet. Unfortunately, the only empty seat was next to someone shuffling through a deck of playing cards. Part-time detective tip number 39, don't gamble in a moving vehicle. Urban traffic patterns are risky enough. But no, those weren't playing cards, they were tarot cards. Seems like everyone was reaching towards the supernatural. I took the seat and flicked on my recorder. Could you please introduce yourself?
My name is Aaron Bonis. I'm an actor and writer and singer and performer and tarot reader in New York.
We were a long way from New York. I hope he kept his bus transfer. So, Aaron, why tarot?
So I got into tarot at the beginning of the pandemic. It was kind of meeting me at a time where I was leaving religion and trying to figure that out. And I was also coming out. And so there was like a whole sexuality thing. And I think I was also bored because we were all at home. And I feel like I wanted to make some meaning out of my life and also to like therapize myself in a way. That's where it kind of started, where I was like, how can I regulate all of these things, or like just keep a log of my life, or even have a framework of what to believe and how to do the things.
Were you sort of invited into tarot? Did you find it on your own, or did you have a friend who was kind of the gateway?
I think I had maybe 1 or 2 readings before I bought my own deck, which is something you're not supposed to do. Supposedly, it's supposed to be gifted to you.
Note to self, seems like humans just can't resist a secret society. But you broke the rules. Did you know that rule at the time?
I did. I had looked it up and I was like adamant that it was not going to become a god, like God to me was before. So I was like, I'm creating my own thing. I'm going to write down. I had this whole journal and I pulled a card every day and I was like, this is what this means to me. And then it all went to craziness.
Craziness, and by that you mean it became a bit much bigger part of your life than you anticipated.
Absolutely. A bigger part and more magical and surprising than I think I was expecting.
Okay, so can you take me through that transition? And when did it sort of, change from something that was a bit interesting to something that you realized had the potential to change your life?
It probably changed when I started doing readings for other people. Then when it started to be like, oh, this card is showing up, it usually means this. And the other person would be like, wow, that's crazy because that's happening in my life. How could it have known that I was going through that thing?
Were people paying you, or were these pro bono readings?
Probably not for the first year-ish. They weren't. And then I started to offer readings.
So seeing the effect it was having on other people, you realized sort of the profound effect it had already been having on you?
Yeah. And the way that I've been reading has changed a lot. I created this thing. I had a whole Instagram and I created these vibe and guides. So it would be like the first card is like the thing to think about, like the vibe. And then the second card was what to do about it and like how you can like get through that or whatever. And I think it got really popular and I was like, whoa, what exactly is happening right here? Especially during the pandemic and through social media, you're not actually like with someone and it's going to like thousands of people. So how is this actually affecting? Like, what is it that I'm doing that touches people? And is it me or is it like these cards?
So what do you think it is? Is it you? Is it the cards?
I think it's partially me. I like to think so. Only because when I'm reading, there's like what the card means. And then I've kind of built in like, how do you help through that? Like, what is the therapeutic type of response to that? So instead of someone being like, death cards, spooky times, I'm like, how do you like work through it? Like, but I also think that there's something to the randomness of it and also just how life, I feel like, works. I don't believe per se in a higher power, but one of my astrology teachers talked about like fractals and how the world is just happening, and in nature there's a lot of that happening, and how flowers are made, and how like your eyeball looks like space, and all of the things. I feel like there's something to that where if you shuffle a deck of cards and it's completely random, something is like mirrored in that comes out. And I vacillate, is that the right word?
Mm-hmm.
It's because I do vacillate, because sometimes I'll be like, what do these cards mean? They don't mean anything to me. But I think that's part of it. I think part of it is like not knowing what exactly is happening. It's like the proof is like, did it predict your day? And like yesterday it did. And do I need to know why that happened? I don't know.
So if it could be predictive or also sometimes could not be so predictive, what is the utility of tarot in our daily lives? What is the use? Why does anyone need it?
Well, on one level, I think that it brings a sort of wonder to your life where you're like, life is already so terrible sometimes and so like boring. So you need some kind of whimsy in your life to be like, oh, maybe this is like doing something for me. And it is helpful as a framework to think about your life, I think, because if you're going through something and you're so in it that you don't know how to process it, my friends and I are very easy to be like, oh, I'm going through like a tower moment. And then you're like, oh, that's what this is. And it does help a little. It's not going to make the tower, which is this like crazy Mars card, any easier.
Hey, Ruby, what's the significance of Mars in the tarot?
Mars is Roman mythology's god of war.
It's also the namesake of Natalie Duncan's AI bug business.
Mars manifests in tarot as not only death and destruction, but competition and ambition.
Right. Winners and losers, love and hate, two sides of the same coin.
Sounds like you and Dorito.
Yeah, even a metaphorical coin is something Dorito would try to steal. Does the card itself matter, or are these basically just arbitrary prompts? Like, in improv, when someone from the audience yells out a suggestion like bubbles, or you're all riding a fire truck or something, does it matter what it is, or is it just a way to kind of shift our thinking or kickstart our thinking?
Does it matter what it is? I think yes, because they're so different too. So I think it does matter what exactly comes out. But I do agree that it is a way of shifting your thinking. I used to think of it kind of as like doing yoga. If you have a really good yoga teacher, so they're like breathing through what the position you're doing, and like how do you meet this moment, how you react or choose to respond can be carried through to your real life. How you react in a tarot reading where it's like, this isn't actually scary, like nothing's actually happening to you, that response can transfer to real life.
So if it's about a choice to react, what is the difference between chance and fate, and where does tarot sit in that timeline?
Today, I'll say that both obviously happen, things randomly happen, and then we choose to do things. I think tarot might be the bridge between those things.
Between chance and fate.
Yeah. I think about that for tarot, for astrology, where it's like, oh my God, this gets into the whole like free will thing, because they're
right. Well, I'm
like,
curious, like in the sense that tarot being potentially predictive, are the cards, do I still have agency, or does my reading sort of determine what will happen?
No, yeah.
What do you think in your own life?
I think it's probably a mix of both. I think that there are parameters cards or astrology might hint to that this type of thing is going to happen. This is talking more about astrology, but a thing that one of my teachers said is that planets are moving, they're bodies in space moving around, and we are also bodies in space moving around. And we're on our own planet, so just because these planets are moving and predicting a certain thing, we also are also moving and doing things. But I also like to think of it with the cards being like the weather, where you're like, it's going to rain today. It probably will rain today, but you could stay inside. You could go outside. I'm just going to be wet and it'll be fine. And yes, it rained, but I'm wet and I'm going to enjoy it. And I'll run through the rain, and I almost got hit by a car.
Well, careful with the last part, but you had me until then. The rest sounds quite inspiring. When you're giving yourself a reading, do you ever draw a card you don't like, and because no one's watching, just quickly switch it with another card?
Absolutely not.
That's forbidden?
I've never done it where I don't like that card.
Like if you're playing a board game and a die lands on its side or something, do you re-roll, or what happens?
Because of the way that I pull them, most of the time I'll lay them out and then I flip it over. So the chance of it like flipping over is different for me. I don't do like reversals
What's a reversal?
where the card came
Oh,
up
upside down? Oh, yeah, okay. You don't do that. Why not?
The first deck that I got, you could tell if it was upside down. So I didn't like that. And I was like, well, then I'm going to know that it's upside down. And that doesn't make it random and it doesn't make it like as chancy.
See, you need a little bit of chaos.
Yes. In tarot and life. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I can see the conviction, the way you answered that.
Because usually when you do a reversal, it's like, this is the good version and then this is the bad version. But the way that I read it, that's all in there.
Mm-hmm.
So even this like 10 of stones that's like supposed to be amazing and a family and you have your very resourced has all aspects of that where you're like, and do you not feel like that? Or is that something you're missing? Or
right. And I wonder too, because there are cards in tarot like the devil or death or something, which I think sort of moralize as being bad, but they have much more nuanced readings. So are any cards in tarot even really good or bad cards?
I'll take this from the astrology that I'm learning. Saturn, for example, is a hard planet. It's like, it represents extremes. It's super cold, super hot. It's no, whereas Jupiter is yes. I think that there are hard and easy things in life, but again, it's like the response to it that is like, yes, this is going to be a hard month for you, I'm predicting, but how are you gonna...
Right, like, are you gonna run in the rain?
Yeah, it's going to rain. Rain exists. Like, a lot of people try to make it very like toxic positivity where it's like, and it's just about how you look at it. But we're in a world where there is death and there is war and all of these bad things, and there are systems that are put into place that like make it harder for people and also easier for some people. And so I don't like to take that away and just be like, well, you're just not working hard enough, or you're just not seeing life as rosy as you should, and then life would be better. Over time, my magical perspective has been more realistic, where it's like, yeah, it's going to be bad, but let's pull another card to see how you could get through it.
I love that. Just keep pulling. Just keep pulling. And finally, and you don't have to do this, would you pull a card for me now?
Absolutely.
And then tell me what it means for me.
Do you have a question, or would you like to?
No.
No.
Well, maybe inside, but I don't want to tip the scale, so to speak.
Yeah. All right. This is the card you got, the Four of Stones, which is the Four of Pentacles in a lot of other decks.
There's stones, there's a bit of a river and sort of a coastline almost. It's like a beach.
Yeah, and there's 3 stones that are in the river and 1 stone that's not in the river. This card has to do with feeling like you have to hold on to all of your resources and all of the physical and like tangible things in your life because something might change and they're like, you don't have enough.
Note to self, he's right. Part-time detective tip number 25. Without a mystery, I'm out of business.
And sometimes that's necessary where you're like, yeah, and I don't have enough. And sometimes you can like feel a little more generous and go with that water.
So how do I know?
How do you know?
When to hold on and when to let go?
I think you have to choose to do something, or the choice will be, it'll choose for you.
This has been so helpful. Thank you so much, Aaron.
You're welcome.
Carry an umbrella, I guess, is my advice to you.
I appreciate it. We actually bought 3 more umbrellas.
You're stocked now. There you go. You live and you learn. That's what I learned from tarot.
Exactly.
The bus lurched and I fell forward. Hey, what gives?
What gives? How about my brakes? Hold on tight, folks.
What?
In Laser Lips, I found out something about tarot you might want to know.
It's a bad time, Ruby. We're having a bit of a tower moment over here.
Playing cards arrived in Europe from the Islamic world at the end of the 14th century, evolving into a storytelling type game enjoyed by the Italian aristocracy, before finally becoming a tool for divination. However, some people believe that tarot is based on an Egyptian holy book belonging to the god of wisdom.
Ancient Egypt. Oh, excuse me.
Countless deck variations have been created, including a 19th century French iteration called the Golden Beetle Oracle.
This is good, Ruby.
I also looked into the card Darren drew for you. The 4 of stones, coins, or pentacles. Some readings interpret it as a warning to move slowly and deliberately, and that the wrong perspective might put you in irreversible danger.
Hey, I'm always deliberate. Oh, ow!
That's exactly the kind of cockiness that could get you in trouble. Aaron also said he doesn't read reversals, but the reversal of the Four of Stones suggests that your resentment could derail you.
I resent that.
If you've got a bone to pick with Dorito, the part-time detective guild, the OBMs, or Eve, don't let it get the better of you.
This isn't about me, it's about justice. Oh, sorry. Ruby, I gotta go.
Anyone have any comforting last words?
Yeah, actually...
Not you.
Hi, everyone. I'm part-time Detective Trevor Campbell.
Those aren't detective legs.
Thank you. I was a child gymnast. Anyway, I just wanted to say part-time detective tip number 4.
Oh, brother.
What?
Slowly, we got to our feet.
Are we dead?
If this is heaven, why is that femme detective here? Heaven is for men and the women who love them.
Sorry about that, folks. It appears we had some kind of brake malfunction, and then we stopped. You're fine. Now get out. This bus is now out of service.
Aaron's tarot deck had exploded across the bus when we stopped. All of the cards were face down, except for one. The Fool. I think I'm gonna be sick. I ran from the bus and... What did I eat that was pink?
Ma'am?
Huh?
Are you here for the 1 Bajillion Moms rally?
I turned my head to see a well-kempt woman in a sandwich board reading, "Save Our Children."
I couldn't agree more. It all starts in 20 minutes in the mall atrium, next to the fountain. You can't miss it. But if you do, try praying.
20 minutes would give me time to investigate one more lead, one that had gotten its teeth into me from the jump. Nick Cave. Lauren, the Australian Dunkaroos inspector with a head tattoo, had thought Mr. Cave's mouth stylet might have a taste for blood. If queerness was contagious like the OBM suspected, I was looking for a possible host and method of infection. Nick Cave was pretty damn close to the center of the corkboard. Bites, bugs, and Australians with a hankering for the good book and a taut jugular. Like most 21st century malls, ours was practically a ghost town. Most storefronts were shut, with a smattering of neon still crackling its electrical SOS. Low traffic meant low budgets, and the standard licensed mall muzak had been replaced with a CD looping atmospheric Halloween music. Fortunately, the store I was looking for was still in business. Donna's Summer Jams, the last CD shop for 100 miles, or 160.9 kilometers if you keep it metric, like Mr. Cave. I made a beeline for the counter.
Beep beep, toot toot. Welcome to Donna's Summer Jams. I'm Donna Sumner.
Sorry, Donna Summer?
Sumner. S-U-M-N-E-R.
Oh, still, that's a fun coincidence?
Oh, is it fun?
Okay. Damn it. Okay, I cannot believe I'm turning down the chance to find out about your weird vendetta against Donna Summer, but I just do not have the time. Donna led me to the C section, and I flipped through the jewel cases in search of Australia's favorite nightcrawler. Nico Case, Demo Cates, Cautious Play. Nick Cave. Donna was busy carving the eyes out of a Bad Girls Tour poster, so I popped open a few of the CDs and started digging through the liner notes. The lyrics were suspiciously familiar.
There's a virus come to town. Won't somebody give me a yes?
Yeah, right on the mouth stylets.
Wolves have carried your babies away. Oh, your kids drip from their teeth.
Sounds like the OBM flyer. Wait a minute.
That pink paper pinafore that you keep mending. Well, if you're gonna dine with a cannibal, sooner or later, darling, you're gonna get eaten.
Dag nabbit, where have I seen a pinafore recently? Suddenly, the power cut out and the store plunged into darkness. And though I couldn't explain how, I became aware of a presence. The emergency generator kicked in, and inches from me stood a figure bathed in the rich red glow of the blood-red backup lights. Without thinking, I whipped out my recorder. I had a sense of who she was. Her Bad Seed t-shirt helped. Part-time detective case note number 29. I'm speaking to a somewhat Nick Cave fan who was friends with other Nick Cave fans. Could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Lauren McEnemy. I am a writer, editor and journalist, originally from Australia, now based in London in the UK.
What's your personal relationship with Nick Cave?
My personal relationship with Nick Cave is, I think it's an on-again, off-again relationship, I would explain it as. Certainly growing up in Australia in the 80s and 90s, he was all pervasive. I was obsessed with him around the time of the Murder Ballads album, especially since Kylie Minogue was involved in that. So like my little teeny bopper brain was very excited. And I think that was probably my first proper introduction to being a Nick Cave fan. He had been there in the background. I knew his music, but that was the first album I bought with my hard-earned pocket money. And I, became a fan from there. But I sort of come in and out of it. I'm not one of these obsessive fans that, will tour the world with him, that pour over everything he's ever done. I have never seen The Proposition, for example. But I am a fan. I've seen him live many times. And I was also a music reporter back in Australia around the time of a Nick Cave album release. So that was the early 2000s. So I have seen the media frenzy around a Nick Cave release in Australia as well.
One sec. Ruby, what's The Proposition?
A 2005 Australian Western written and scored by Nick Cave. Apparently he wrote the screenplay in only 3 weeks.
Thanks, Ruby. Okay, Lauren, this is good. So I'm speaking to the right person. So Kylie Minogue, of course, Australian treasure, very, I think, understood as a mainstream pop artist. Was Nick Cave considered mainstream in Australia, or was he still kind of on the fringe?
He was still absolutely on the fringe. I mean, he was iconic, but he was definitely the guy you didn't want to come across. He wasn't someone your mum would be happy for you to be listening to.
Oh, which I'm sure was part of the appeal.
Absolutely part of the appeal. And, both my brother and I, we would sit in our sort of front room in front of the telly every Saturday morning watching Video Hits, which was a video clips TV show. And they would play Where the Wild Roses Grow. And it was so beautiful and atmospheric. I even remember I was in year 7 at the time. So Australian year 7, that is the last year of primary school.
So approximately what age would you be?
12, I think about 12.
Okay.
And in English studies, we had to do a poem. We were doing poetry and we had to sort of pick apart a poem and present something to do with the poem. And I presented Where the Wild Roses Grow. I had the song playing behind me as I dissected the lyrics of the song. It was just, that was like, I guess, the first real literary interaction I ever had with music. I'm such a music fan. I grew up with like my parents are big music fans. It's always been there. I am a self-described pop culture nerd, but that was the first real literary interaction I had with any sort of music.
Right. And now as a journalist and as a writer, English and literature, those ideas are the foundation of your career. So it sounds like that song really sort of influenced the trajectory of what you went on to become.
Yeah, and I think it really actually revealed hidden things to me as well. Like around that age, I was starting to go through my goth phase. I was wearing black a lot. No one was very happy about it, but I was happiest in black.
Note to self. Sounds like a vampire child turned by Nick Cave himself.
I was very, very young goth. I was reading horror. Like I am now a horror writer, but at that point, I was already reading point horror books and Stephen King, but really shouldn't have been reading Stephen King at that age.
Oh my gosh.
But, I was really getting into that stuff. And so Nick Cave kind of coincided with this dawning of my own darkness. I went away from it again, but as I came back to it, like I've had a couple of ebbs and flows of this dark nature before I actually fully embraced it. And Nick Cave seems to have been around each time the ebb has gone up. There's been a bit of Nick Cave around there.
Apart from the sort of bad boy idea, what was the initial seductive power of Nick Cave, do you think, at that time? What spoke to you?
What spoke to me was the storytelling, really. I mean, I've seen him described, and I would absolutely agree, as he does Southern Gothic. The idea of the murder ballad is very Southern Gothic. As someone who is very drawn to the Gothic and the dark in that sort of supernatural kind of spooky sense, I think that was the early beginnings of it for me. There was something about this guy that wasn't quite normal. And there was that dark allure. And, there were other songs around there. Obviously the Kylie thing helped a lot as a sort of 12-year-old Australian girl. But there was just something there, I think, that was alluring to me for sure.
And from what I've read, there's always been this kind of dance with religion in a vague capacity in the occult and things like that. Were your parents particularly God-fearing? Did they see anything about your fandom with Nick Cave as something they had to watch out for?
They didn't. Ironically, my primary school was a very Catholic school, and then I went to an all-girl Catholic school, convent school run by nuns.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, actual convent on site. So there was definitely...
Was that like a trade, like, Is there some component of that school that's a trade school for nuns? Like you're training to become a convent member?
Oh, they definitely would have loved it. But I mean, I think by that point, there were very, very few young nuns.
Okay.
And there were a lot of older nuns. They were keeping an eye on people, I think. Definitely, if someone showed an aptitude for the theology, they would have tapped them on the shoulder, yeah.
I see. So Nick Cave had better PR than the nuns did, it sounds like.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But also, I mean, my parents weren't that religious. So, you know, my parents are Scottish, they're from Glasgow, and, you know, religion has very different connotations in Scotland and Ireland, especially around the time my parents were growing up. So I think they were very wary about the religious side of things and imposing things in terms of religion. But it was still I won't say a conservative with a capital C sort of upbringing, but it was a conservative upbringing in that sense of there was religion there. You know, we didn't go to church every Sunday, but we did go to church with school. We went through religious studies. I say me and my brother, who went to the brother school that was run by the priests. So
yeah, the Catholics love a little bit of segregation.
They do, absolutely. His school's across the road from us. I had to travel to my school. I was very upset. But yeah, so I think there was, you know, just that. The thing with Catholicism is it's very, very ritual based, particularly with, you know, the Celtic upbringing as well. There is a lot of ritual just as an undercurrent in my upbringing. And I think there is a ritual definitely in terms of Nick Cave as well, whether it is his live shows, which obviously I experienced as an adult, not at 12 years old. That would never have happened, but particularly not with him at that time, you know, in the 80s and 90s was his heroin period. That wouldn't have happened.
That's right.
Yeah, but I think it's the ritual side of things and sort of that lure of there is something more than just music happening here, that is something that attracts me to that side of the world.
And I've read that the way he sort of thinks about his live shows, he says some artists think about the relationship as very one way, like artist to the audience, but for him it's always been very reciprocal. And that's the way he thinks about his fandom sort of writ large. So what specifically do you mean about the ritual of the performance?
Sure. So I saw him back in Australia when I was a music writer and you know, I was quite far back because, you know, I had this was the early 2000s. So when you're filing a review, you've got your computer with you, you have a mobile phone to track. It wasn't like it is now.
Hey, Ruby, did any version of you exist in 2000?
Do you remember those Nokia cell phones?
Yeah, I had one of those. It had that snake game.
I was the snake.
Whoa, thanks.
So I had to sort of be far away. So I didn't quite get the full experience. And then actually it was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, Nick Cave was touring and he played in Victoria Park in London, which is a big, big park. It was a big summer outdoor gig. It was a festival. And my husband had never seen him. So I was like, you have to see Nick Cave. So we went along and Kylie made an appearance. So it was very exciting.
There's never just one Australian by themselves. There's always at least two.
We come in pairs. What can I say?
That's
My
right.
husband, though, is English. So, you know, we're not a pair there. But yeah, so I took him along and he was enthralled. Like a bit like me, casual fan. He's had his moments. Wouldn't call himself an obsessive fan by any means. And he just kept staring at him. We weren't particularly close to the front, but we were close enough. And he just said, he's like a preacher. He is like a dark preacher. And so we now refer to him as the devil's preacher because his shows, I think particularly now that he is older and he is much more open about his spirituality, which is both good and bad. I think his shows have taken on that feeling of, you know, the old school Southern Baptist preacher touring around the southern states of the US trying to, the faith healer, that kind of thing, you know, that's what it feels like.
Mm-hmm. Sort of the white tent with those Edison bulbs hanging around it.
Absolutely. You know, who's, you know, going to speak in tongues for me so I can take the devil out of you. Yeah, that's what it feels like.
Note to self, take the devil out of you and replace it with what? And, you know, you talked about your interest in Southern Gothic and thinking about that too. There's a lot of associations with Nick Cave and vampirism. Is that something that you've heard about before? And what's your take on that?
My take on that is I can definitely see why people say it, particularly in his younger days. But as someone who loves a good vampire tale, I can tell you he is aging too much to be a vampire.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he is aged. He's aging well, but he has clearly changed in his appearance. So he doesn't have that sort of glow of the immortal.
That's a great point. Or maybe he's just not eating enough.
Maybe he's not. Maybe, as he has gotten older and more involved in the church, he has decided that, he will deny himself his natural nourishment. But I did actually ask, I do have a friend who is the, obsessive Nick Cave fan who stalks him across the UK and is about to stalk him across Europe on his next tour. And she sent me a message going, he's not actually a vampire. Despite being supernaturally sexy and charismatic, he takes the tube like a normal human. And his wife's now defunct clothing company, which was The Vampire's Wife, Susie Cave high fashion label, which was beloved of Princess Beatrice and many celebrities over here. That was actually named after a book he was writing, but decided not to publish. So she swears blind. He's not actually, despite his reputation, he's not involved in the occult.
She really fed the myth, though.
Yeah, he absolutely fed the myth. And I think it really suits him for people to think that. Certainly, again, I'm kind of drawing a line between younger and older Nick Cave, I think.
Right. Something changed. Maybe the lack of heroin, but
it might well be, but I do think, and he himself has said this, and, not to sort of take it to tragic places, but he's obviously had a lot of loss in his life over the last 10 years. He lost two sons, both in very tragic circumstances. He lost his mum over the pandemic, and she was, it was during lockdown. He couldn't get to Australia to see her because the borders were closed. And his former partner and long-term friend also died recently. And so he's gone through a lot of loss. And I think grief does things to us. And for him, this idea of spirituality that's always been there. I mean, I saw an interview with him once where he said, look, 30 years ago, the enemy told me I couldn't talk about the God stuff. So it's always been there. But now where he's been processing his grief, he's been doing it through religion. He's obviously now matey with the Archbishop of Canterbury, and, he's publishing books about faith. So I think there is definitely a change that's happened. But I think life has brought out something that was always there.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Also, I think maybe certainly Western audiences maybe largely are most familiar with Nick Cave for his song that was covered for the Peaky Blinders.
Red Right
song.
Hand, yeah.
Yeah. And that song certainly, with like the chimes and the bells, which I know show up in other songs of his, there's kind of a hypnotic quality to his music. The way it's sort of like pendulum swings back and forth. And I'm thinking back to what you said about the preacher, sort of this dark preacher, devil's preacher. Do you think, or when you were at that show, do you think you experienced any kind of hypnotism?
I'm not sure about hypnotism, but there is definitely, as you say, something hypnotic about it. And I think that is actually very, very deliberate on his part. I think of a song of his like The Mercy Seat, which is actually about lamentations of a guy on death row as he's being taken to the electric chair. And it is very religious in, its lyrics as well. But that starts off very slow. And as the guy is getting closer and closer to the electric chair, it gets faster and faster and faster. And there is that rhythm and that hypnotic sort of nature to it. Again, that sort of ritualistic, tribal almost element to the music that I think people can be hypnotized by lesser things. Absolutely.
One thing I found in my investigation is it's very hard to get a Nick Cave fan to speak into a microphone. It seems like the more they like Nick Cave, the less likely they are to want to talk about it. Why do you think that is?
There's probably a few reasons. The obvious one to me is that idea that he is the bad boy that you don't really want to be associating with, like, the guy you don't want to take home to mum, that kind of thing. But I think also the people who really, really love Nick Cave do find it a spiritual, transcendental experience, and he is sacred to them. And so anything that might be seen as blasphemous or be seen as, not being reverential to him might send them away. Plus, if he is truly a vampire, then he's probably turned them all and they don't want to be, outed.
It may have been the glow of the emergency light, but Lauren's eyes seem to take on an especially crimson hue.
I think a lot of people put a lot of emphasis on the fact that he's from small town Australia and, he grew up as an outsider in what is now not that small a town, but it was at the time. And I can certainly think that growing up in the 60s and 70s as an outsider in a small town of Australia would have been really difficult. So you can understand why someone might have turned to the darker side. He said in the early days, he was not a fully formed person. He talks about in the early days, he had offensiveness as a sacred duty.
Ooh.
And for him, it was less about kicking against the establishment and more about irritating his peers and his audience to ignite their imaginations, get them thinking, challenge them, and that good art confronted people. And so in that sense, there is still that preacher to him that, you know, trying to elicit some sort of transcendental response to what he was doing. But these days, he sees himself in a completely different way, sees human beings in a different way, and he can now see not just the brokenness of human beings, but the unbelievable value of humans as well. And that's helped him become a more complete person, obviously, through all of the tragedy that he has had in recent years. And again, that is interesting. You know, he's very open about the skepticism of his beliefs, but he's very open about the fact that he believes them. And you could argue that at the time of the birthday party, with offensiveness as a sacred duty, that was his way of bringing together his acolytes to get his message across. Whereas now the appealing to the more spiritual, the, hey, we're all broken, but we're all human side of things, is the more modern way of getting that across. So in that way, maybe he is a vampire because he's moving with the times.
I mean, he certainly has been reflecting, which is very interesting. Now, listen, quick question. Do you know the name of the town that he's from?
I think it's Wangaratta.
Have you been there?
I haven't, but I know people from around there.
Is it sort of countryside or rural?
It is. It's country-ish. It's not like outback. It's pretty close to Melbourne.
Okay. Is it the kind of place where you might hear cicadas?
We don't really get cicadas in Australia, to be honest.
My mouth went completely dry. Not wanting Lauren to catch me on the back foot, I wrap things up on a lighter note. Really? Lauren, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. And I guess my last question would be the trolley problem. If you had Nick Cave on one track and Kylie Minogue on another, and you could only flip the switch to save one, who would it be?
I actually personally would save Nick Cave.
That's fine. That tracks with everything you've just told me.
Yeah, my brother would kill me though.
Your brother's more of a Kylie Minogue fan.
Oh yeah, very much.
Well, hopefully we'll live in a world where we can save both.
We can save both.
Once again, we were thrust into blackness. And then the fluorescents resumed their glow. Donna was behind the counter, humming an off-key rendition of Last Dance. Lauren was gone. I looked down at my watch and realized that the OBMs event, the one I'd come all the way to the mall for, was only minutes away. I stuffed the Nick Cave CDs back into the shelves and hightailed it into the corridor.
Love to love you, baby.
Yes, thank you, Donna Sumner. I didn't have much time, but I had to get my head in order before whatever was coming next. Too far from my own makeshift sensory deprivation tank, I searched for somewhere I'd be free from distractions, preferably somewhere with white noise. Aha! I spotted a loose air vent on the opposite wall, just above a defunct payphone. Like a taller Simone Biles or an even taller Mary Lou Retton, I ran towards the payphone, jumped atop its metal edge, and catapulted myself straight through the vent, removing and replacing its cover wall in my mid-air arc.
Good for you.
The soft whir of the mall's air vac system was the perfect frequency to turn off my thoughts and review what I'd learned over the course of the day. Okay, Campbell, clear your mind and go back through everything you've learned. Today was all about the supernatural, bookended by vampires.
I absolutely love vampires. Give me all the vampires.
As someone who loves a good vampire tale,
I really can't remember a time I wasn't obsessed with vampires.
And with vampires comes blood.
Buckets of blood, bloody rag.
I'm wet and I'm gonna enjoy it.
Blood is just so prevalent and present. You have blood in your stomach. How did blood get into your stomach? You must be eating blood. What does that mean?
What does that mean? What makes a vampire? Its identity or its behavior?
Something is consuming you. You are consuming something.
Vampires are almost us.
Just almost?
We tend to see them as very sort of high-class, almost aspirational creatures in some cases, and this is often, in their portrayal, used as a means of seduction and of finding victims.
The vampire is the stand-in for transmission.
They're so able to draw you in.
there is definitely something hypnotic about it.
They just have this raw magnetism about them. In my best estimation, because they miss us.
Bloodsucking show ponies like Nick Cave miss me?
My personal relationship with Nick Cave
Right, not just me.
kind of coincided with this dawning of my own darkness. There is something more than than just music happening here. Something that attracts me to that side of the world.
You had to have a performative element to your practice if you're going to have a client base.
He's like a preacher. He is like a dark preacher.
But is that necessarily queer?
There's no such thing as a heterosexual vampire. They're already living outside of so many societal norms. Why would they constrain themselves to the societal norms surrounding sexual orientation?
Right, but that was their own business.
They might be responsible for your gay awakening, but all kinds of things can be responsible for one's gay awakening. I don't think that we have any right to pin that exclusively on vampires.
I'd assumed that vampires were the enemy, but maybe they just got a bad rap.
The vampire becomes both a scapegoat for disease and also for any sort of permissive experience or like liberated sexual experience that you've had.
What is it I'm doing that touches people?
So then disease, queerness, vampirism become this like holy trifecta.
Right, we wanted to protect ourselves and our children.
Absolutely not.
The idea of turning a child into a vampire being forbidden.
But if it did happen, what would happen next?
I don't know, I would be pretty angry if I was a 200-year-old genius trapped in a child's body.
Angry children. Precocious children.
It makes for kind of a fun, mysterious childhood. I always felt like I lived in step with something that wasn't the same as what was going on in the conscious world.
Special children.
No way I, a child of the 80s, could have known what that was.
Maybe Mensa is run by vampires, honestly, who knows?
But where did it start?
It's part of their appeal and also just part of how they are able to ensure their survival is their ability to blend in. I don't know if there's an original vampire. Different iterations of vampiric creatures exist across a variety of world mythologies.
It was a dense thesis.
I am a former member of Mensa.
But the beating heart of the story was...
Who's the OG vampire? I don't know. I think you'd have to ask one.
And if I can't find a vampire, what's the next best thing?
Vampires also often have some sort of connection to animals. Like, obviously, they can turn into bats.
Yes, there's raccoons in the walls.
Queer people, our lives are at night. I don't know many queer early birds.
What about pelicans?
Leeches, fleas, scarifiers, the cockchafer beetle, also known as the doodlebug, who are incredibly gay. They love anal penetration. Mosquitoes, which are basically the state bird of Louisiana.
And cicadas?
We don't really get cicadas in Australia, to be honest.
Ha! Well, other Australian Lorens would beg to differ.
I mean, I think bugs will inherit the earth. But buggery, where does that term come from? In the 80s.
We kept going back to the 80s.
In Australia, in the 80s.
A child of the 80s.
Kylie made an appearance, so it was very exciting.
In the 80s, though, there was a lepidopterist, and he was witnessing all of these newly emerged from chrysalis butterflies having gay sex. And he was like, what is happening? Are humans in some way influencing butterflies? You get into a nebulous moral territory if you're talking about homosexuality among any larger creature.
I guess there's raccoons in the walls.
But if you're talking about bugs, yes, like a bunch of bugs come from the underground to like scream and die. Sign me up.
So who had the clearest connection to animals?
St. Francis of Assisi was super hot.
Good Lord, St. Francis.
France wasn't importing its like most like morally...
No, Owen, not France. Francis.
Animals loved him. He chose that haircut too, so I have to think he did it to downplay his natural good looks.
The sacred and supernatural both seem especially seductive.
Super cute. Jesus was hot. Like, if he's down, I'm down.
It's a taboo proposition, but it can be so hard to challenge the alpha.
Apex predator.
Like God to me was before.
Doctors, pharmacists.
I went to an all-girl Catholic school, convent school run by nuns.
Surgeons, barbers.
I look like Mr. Burns in an Aritzia outfit.
They're all just collecting your blood.
But when the people in charge become larger than life, disobedience can seem forbidden.
The rich people peek their thumb on us and say, like, you can't only know this. We're not going to let you know that.
That's the story, anyway.
The space between one experience and another experience, we navigate that by developing story.
What are folk legends but ways to scare kids and keep people inside and stuff like that? You know, it's a way of imparting morals of society.
What is it that I'm doing that touches people?
Seeing the effect it was having on other people, you realize sort of the profound effect it had already been having on you.
Oh yeah, totally.
The space between an experience and a belief, we navigate that by developing lore. That is how we thread the needle between my reality and your reality.
A very useful skill that we have as human beings is to organize our experiences.
What is superstition if not making meaning out of the observable realities around you? And in a time in which science is offering very little, superstition becomes what people are relying on to take care of themselves and each other.
Right. Stories can give us comfort, help us find our individual and collective voice.
We're meaning makers. We're trying to understand this reality.
What do these cards mean? They don't mean anything to me.
And particularly if a church as a primary location of knowledge and meaning making is failing us, and then medicine, Western science is failing us, we're going to carve our own space, and that is often deemed as the space of superstition. But it's really just the space of collective shared knowledge and our own sort of storytelling tradition.
But stories can also silence us.
I think that's the number one rule of the library, to be quiet. As far as I can tell, people are pretty quiet at the library.
Right. This whole mess started at the library, the most egalitarian of our public institutions.
Think about how many books you could read if you were going to live forever. You would be so smart.
Everyone loves the library.
Just there's not enough to do. I was also bored.
Well, not everyone.
And I don't trust the library anymore. I have trust issues with everything these days. I go to the library and I'm like, I don't know, this guy wrote this book like in 1900. Like, he's racist. Can I trust that? I don't think so.
Maybe the supernatural was benign and libraries were the real danger.
Your library of nothing. There was no knowledge here.
Emptiness. So much emptiness and death.
It was the wet grave. There was so much death. Death was abundant.
No one wants death to be the final thing and the last time you see anyone. And so I think a ghost is the most hopeful application of that phenomenon.
Yeah, but what did ghosts have to do with
For the
this?
first little while anyway, being dead must be quite a shock.
I think grief does things to us.
I think that ghosts are like a projection of your grief and your desire not to die.
But I think that's part of it. I think part of it is like not knowing what exactly is happening.
Like a bad trip.
I would not recommend reading James Joyce if you're not on LSD.
I've had a couple of ebbs and flows of this dark nature before I actually fully embraced it.
Life is already so terrible sometimes and so boring.
I'd had my own existential crisis after my child gymnastics injury. When you're that low, your options feel limited. You're pretty susceptible to influence.
I was wearing black a lot. No one was very happy about it, but I was happiest in black.
So you need some kind of whimsy in your life.
If you're not on LSD.
Things randomly happen and then we choose to do things.
To like scream, fucking die.
I think tarot might be the bridge between those things. What do these cards mean? They don't mean anything to me.
Life has brought out something that was always there.
But I think that's part of it.
What's part of it?
I think you have to choose to do something, or it'll choose for you.
Detective Campbell?
You've got your computer with you.
Detective Campbell?
Can't trust technology always.
Detective Campbell?
It'll choose for you.
Who's there?
Your heart rate dropped dangerously low. Either you're doom scrolling or something's wrong.
A bit of both, actually. Sorry, where am I?
It looks like you're in an air vent at the mall.
The OBM rally. Thanks, Ruby. In my fugue state, I appear to have been crawling through the vent. I had no idea how far I was from where I'd wriggled in, and I didn't want to waste any more time, so I continued on in the direction of the noise below. Every time I passed over a grating, I got a glimpse of the crowd.
Thank you to the mall manager for that rousing welcome speech. I understand he'll be giving free ear piercings in the food court immediately following tonight's event. And that for only $5, you can also get your photo taken with the one and only Donna Summer.
It's Sonar, you fool!
She works hard for the money. Now, without further ado, please welcome this evening's main stage speaker, a decorated freedom fighter in the war for our children, the presidentress of 1 bajillion moms, and a widow. Please welcome Evelyn Majors.
From high above, I scanned the faces of the erupting crowd. As expected, it skewed maternal, the recently initiated with babes in arms, while their weathered comrades chased their ankle-biting grooves through a sea of culottes and off-the-rack athleisure leggings. At least a quarter of the crowd was childless, including a familiar figure in an arrogant fedora. Dorito!
Thank you for the warm welcome. Please call me Eve.
We love you, Eve!
It's great to see so many moms and friends of moms come together in the most American of public commons and ostentatiously designed mall atrium. You know, no matter who you are or how you look at it, mom is mom. Say it with me. Mom is mom. That's because the word is a palindrome. It looks and sounds the same, even when reversed.
Oh my god, she's right.
How'd she do that?
And if you look at it upside down, wow! Jokes aside, what we've gathered here to talk about is no laughing matter. Our children are under attack.
Here we go.
And I'm not talking about the 1982 A-side single that ended ABBA's chart-topping golden era. I'm talking about a subconscious, subliminal kind of manipulation that is infecting our next generation while they're still in swaddling clothes. Something out there is making our kids queer. I say queer, not to be progressive, but to address the true scope of this invisible threat. This goes far beyond gender identity, sexual orientation, or whatever libertine checkboxes they've added to the Reader's Digest subscription slip. Something is leaving our kids touched, twisted. It's making them curious.
Interesting. I built my career on curiosity, and from my perspective, about 100 feet in the air through the parallel slats of a suburban mall's airvac system, the only people who feared curiosity were those who feared the truth. In other words, a part-time detective's sworn adversary.
And moms and friends of moms, you know what they say about curiosity.
She curled her bejeweled fingers next to either ear.
And curiosity can kill the kitten. I should know.
Eve held out her arms and a pinafore child of 5 or 6 rushed the stage. It was that brat who'd flipped me the bird on the bus. Eve was Pinafore Kid's mom. She scooped the child into her arms as if plucking a roll of cotton batting from a craft store clearance bin.
Now that's a mom.
This is my child, little Sherbert. 1 week ago, Sherby was the picture of pediatric health. Then, unannounced, her school took her on a field trip to the public library. Oh, I was furious. Public Books? We already have a full set of chicken soup books at home, except for Chicken Soup for the Beach Lover's Soul, which just feels, honestly, that one was a bit of a stretch, even for Jack Canfield. Anyway, after the library, something seemed different.
Why?
That's right. Why? Why? More than ever before, Sherby had a desperate hunger to know why. Then the symptoms started. Queasiness, clammy hands, itchy neck, and a mysterious pressure headache.
Wait, what? Those symptoms are the same as mine.
Why? Why?
Yes, why had my child changed? So I took her to the doctor with the same question. Why? Every test came back negative, but little Sherbert's condition continued to worsen. And then I had a dream.
The lights in the mall's atrium cut, and someone flicked on one of those starry sky projectors. Eve and her child were awash in the spectacular glow of the cosmos.
In my dream, I wandered through an enormous library. Everywhere, books. Then, though, a thick tome with an unusual spine caught my attention. I eagerly pulled it from the shelf, but when I opened it, it was empty. The book next to it was empty too, as was its neighbor. I ran down the corridors, pulling books at random and finding each barren, each spread desolate, meaningless, mocking me. Then the intercom of this wicked little warehouse crackled to life, and a voice said, "Your child has been infected. In 10 days she will die. Also, the library will close in 15 minutes.
The lights changed, and Eve and little Sherbert were once again bathed in spotlight.
I awoke in a start, a feverish dew on my face that was admittedly fresh. Today is day 7. I'm fortunate to be a woman of faith, which giveth unto me hope.
Oh, we love you, Eve.
But hope alone won't save my child. So I'm humbled to stand here in this gorgeous mall atrium as the divinely elected matriarch of 1 bajillion moms and a mother herself, and ask for your support. Finding a cure will be expensive, but your child could be next. Your donation could save not just little Sherbert, but humankind as we know it. So, will you do it? Will you save our children?
The crowd ignited, handbags torn open, coins and credit cards clattering across the stage like hail, and banknotes bursting into the air like paper fireworks. Through the clamor, I could see Eve beam, but then her smile went cold and she let out a blood-curdling... Little Sherbert was in convulsions, foaming at the mouth, her limp arms dangling from their swaddled woost.
Why?
Sherby? Why what?
Suddenly, little Sherbert tossed back her head, jaw slack, and through a cloud of foamy bile shot a brilliant beam of iridescent light.
Sherby!
Her head whipped to the side, and the concentrated beam blasted through the atrium's glass ceiling, slicing through the roof steel grid and the air vent I was currently hidden in like a knife through hot butter. I jammed my hands outward to starfish the air duct's now gaping maw, barely holding my body aloft as the vent sagged from imbalance, its ragged opening not in front of me but beneath me, framing an 80-foot drop onto the crowd, who was currently busy scrambling over a tangle of plastic chairs. Oh, somehow I always knew I'd die in a mall.
Detective Campbell, your watch has notified me that your heart rate has surpassed 180 BPM. Do I even want to ask what you're doing?
If you don't hear from me in the next few minutes, I've probably impaled myself on a chair leg.
Gross, commencing memory wipe.
Ruby, there's a manila envelope in a hidden panel beneath my desk. No matter what happens, make sure no one gets their hands on it.
Detective Campbell, are you okay?
Before I could answer, I lost my grip.
Detective Campbell? Detective Campbell? Detective Campbell? Oh no. Detective Campbell? Detective Campbell? Detective Campbell? To be continued. The tape has ended. Please insert the next tape and press now.
Queerial is presented by You Made Me Queer and the Sonar Network. It's written, produced, and sound designed by me, Trevor Campbell. Editing is by me and Harlow Castillo, with mixing exclusively by Harlow. This episode featured Owen Ever, Aaron Bonas, Lauren McEnemy, Stephanie Malek, Meghan Hoople, Nug Nahrgang, Joy Thompson, Rachel Brittain, and a text-to-speech avatar named Kimberly as Ruby 3000. You can learn more about them and their work in our show notes. Our theme and all of our music is by Kritty. For more of her work, check out lavenderbruisers.bandcamp.com. You can find extra clues and case notes for this episode at trevorcampbell.ca/Queerial or on Instagram at YouMadeMeQueer. If you want to stay on the case, subscribe to Queerial in your favorite podcast app. Until next time, be careful out there. Things are getting queer.
This podcast has been brought to you by the Sonar Network.